Today we celebrate Saint Charles Borromeo, a great reformer for his time and patron of seminaries because of the work that he did to especially reform the clergy. And Saint Charles grew up in a noble family. He was the son of a count, but he was the second son. And so he became a minor cleric. And when his maternal uncle from the Medici family, the powerful Medici family, when he became pope in the 1500s, he made his nephew Charles a cardinal, even though he wasn't even yet a priest. He was a minor cleric, and he made him the Secretary of State. So he's only 22, and he was given this whole slew of titles and responsibilities from, across even different parts of Europe, not just in Italy. And St. Charles did grow up with a good heart. He already had some natural virtues. He even cared for the poor. He was a morally upright man, although being in a noble family, he did enjoy the luxury that he, had, including hunting or hosting great banquets, having entertainment with music, all these kind of things that were typical for his background. And a few years later, though, after both his father and his brother died, he was suddenly head of the estate. And he had this choice. And a lot of people expected him to go with one choice, basically to leave behind this clerical position, his cardinalship, and because he had not yet even been ordained a deacon, he could be still leave that behind and become married and take care of this noble estate. Well, the death of his brother kind of shook him up, and he realized, even though he was already doing some good work for several years in reforming the church and all the corruption that was going on at that time, that was the time of the Protestant Reformation, he determined after the death of his brother to consecrate his life anew to God. And that's when things became more ascetical, more penitential. He realized he needed to leave everything behind. Just like in our gospel today, when Jesus says God invites many, but they all come up with excuses and they have all these attachments and they won't come to his banquet. St. Charles wanted to leave everything behind, not have any attachments, so that he could truly serve the Lord and take part in the marriage banquet of heaven. Take his spot that was reserved for him. So St. Charles gave his noble estate of his family to his uncle and decided to become ordained a priest. And so he was ordained only at the age of 25, and then a couple months later was made bishop. So St. Charles had a lot of responsibility at a very young age, and yet he did not waste that opportunity. He, with great zeal, sought to bring about reform in the church. And so he was the one who kind of got the Council of Trent going again. There was a lot in the political and ecclesiastical atmosphere at that time to even just gather all the cardinals and bishops for the Council of Trent. And for the third session, he was kind of seen as the mastermind and main spearheader behind a lot of its work. And he was the one who really put a lot of work into the Catechism of the Council of Trent, the Roman Catechism, which was a great gift for all the priests at that time to be united in preaching and teaching and catechizing the faithful, because the priests had no really formal training. There was always, up until that time, just kind of by apprenticeship. So the Council of Trent instituted the seminary system. And St. Charles Borromeo was, again, someone who really spearheaded that movement as well. And he also wanted to make sure that the laity didn't just have catechism on Sundays through the Catechism of the Council of Trent that the priests were to use. He also wanted the children to especially have great attention in being taught. And so he founded the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, which still exists today, right? CCD. So he especially wanted the children to come to know God. And in that catechism, right, it's not just things to memorize, but it's an opportunity to come to know God so that we may love and serve him more faithfully. St. Charles, after his uncle died and Pius V became Pope, he wanted to kind of leave behind Rome and go to where he was actually Bishop of Milan, and Pius V let him, and so he sought to instill a lot of the reforms there in Milan as well, and he had a lot of work cut out for him. And even with dealing with all the things in the church, trying to purify the church and get things in order there's just always things of the world that kind of seem to get in the way. There was a famine for a few years where for 3 months he fed out of his own money 3,000 people. He did a lot to try to make sure the poor were taken care of, especially with the hospitals. We have the Little Sisters of the Poor here, so St. Charles Borromeo would especially appreciate all of your works with caring for those that are in need of great mercy physically. And there was a time in which there was a plague that struck the city of Milan, and all the main government officials, magistrates, left their posts, the governor even. And that's how great the fear of this plague created. And St. Charles, though, he saw himself as the shepherd, and the shepherd could not abandon his flock. So he stayed, and he even wrote letters chastising all the city magistrates, telling them to come back and take care of the people that they're, been charged to take care of. So he was kind of left to take care of all these people, and there was bodies just being stacked up in the hospitals because nobody was even really in the hospitals taking care of these people. So he really rallied a lot of the clerics and religious to help and even come from other cities to basically sacrifice their lives and take care of those in great need because of this epidemic. And so he had to kind of organize even the feeding of around 70,000 people that were not having food or proper care. So he is a great inspiration even for us, right? Even with just a few years, the pandemic, we can definitely look to St. Charles Borromeo to see that response of not to fear physical ailment or fear physical death, but rather to be willing to serve the others, especially in their time of need, and make sure that they're also spiritually taken care of. And so, again, the Little Sisters of the Poor, I know you all did great work during the pandemic as well. So we thank you for that, and for the great fight that you've put also up for the kind of the fighting for the truth in our American society, right? And especially the kind of the court case with contraception not being given to workers. St. Charles Borromeo also was persecuted in fighting for the truth and fighting for the kind of what was right. And even from within his own church, he experienced persecution. There was even a group of priests from a certain religious order that weren't happy with being corrected by him, that plotted to kill him. And so while he was praying in the evening in his chapel before the altar. This priest that was disgruntled with him came and shot him, and St. Charles thought he was dying, so he commended himself to the Lord, and then he found out that and the priest had run away as soon as he shot him, point blank. They discovered, though, he only had but a bruise. The vestments that he was wearing at that Vesper service were so thick that it stopped and the bullet was found on the floor. So St. Charles was spared because he still had great work to do and continued to do so. So he was seen as someone with a very pure heart, full of charity, and going back to that time in which there was that epidemic, there was he was selling all the furnishings, even in his own home, to make sure people were being able to be taken care of, down to when someone that was sick needed a bed, he said, here, he can have mine. So for the rest of his life after that, for the rest of the epidemic, he just started sleeping on the floor, and he just continued that even the rest of his life. So he sought to detach himself in service of those in need. And this heart that he had, which you can actually see his heart in a church in Rome. I don't know the name of which one, but somewhere in Rome, there's a church that the altar has his heart. This heart of his was made pure, he said, by meditation. He, in telling priests to renew their minds and hearts, says, "You must realize that for us churchmen, nothing is more necessary than meditation. We must meditate before, during, and after everything we do. The prophet says, 'I will pray, and then I will understand.' When you administer the sacraments, meditate on what you are doing. When you celebrate Mass, reflect on the sacrifice you are offering. When you pray the office, think about the words you are saying and the Lord to whom you are speaking. When you take care of your people, meditate on the Lord's blood that has washed them clean. In this way, all that you do becomes a work of love." And that applies to all of us, not just to priests. Everything that all of us do should be a work of love in serving others, right? As St. Paul says in our first reading, everybody has different gifts, some in prophecy, some in ministry, some in teaching, some in exhorting, some in contributing in generosity, those who are over others serving with diligence, and others doing acts of mercy with cheerfulness. So we are all called to do good in whatever gifts and talents that we have, but we have to do everything with love. We can't get in the habit of just getting into doing things by routine or losing kind of that inspiration of why we went into the work that we might have come into, or whatever vocation we have, or whatever work we end up doing. It always has value as long as we do it with love and for the glory of God. St. Charles once was playing billiards with a couple other priests, and one of them asked St. Charles, "Your Eminence, if you were to find out you were about to die in about 15 minutes, what would you do right now?" And he responded, "Keep playing billiards." And so they were kind of surprised, and he explained further, "Before I started this game, I offered up this time in honor of God. So why should I not continue doing this, even if it's recreation? My intention is pure, that this is for the glory of God. And recreation is part of what I'm supposed to do, especially with you all right now." So that is a reminder for all of us, just as we try to purify the church in the midst of all kinds of evils and corruptions, as we try to purify the world in the midst of all its corruptions and darkness, we need to purify our heart. And then to do that in all the activities of our day, we need to purify our intention. And like St. Charles Borromeo, do it out of love for others and do it in honor of God, for His glory. That is how we will reform the church, by first reforming our hearts. May St. Charles Borromeo pray for us.